You're about to watch a quiet crime happen in broad daylight, not a market crash. Not a scam, but a slow theft where your own intelligence becomes the weapon used against you. Somewhere out there, a retirement account worth $400 is bleeding, 2% at a time, because its owner can't stop looking. And the most terrifying twist? The best performing investors in this story can't even log in, because they're dead. If you want the full case file and the exact trap that turns smart people into fee machines, subscribe now, because by the end, you'll never touch your portfolio the same way again. The case starts the way most modern financial disasters start, with a thumb hovering over a screen. Not a gun, not a signature, a thumb. 3 times today you opened your brokerage app like a nervous tick, hunting for reassurance the way people refresh messages after a breakup. Down 2%, that's all, 2%, but your chest behaves like it's 40. Your palms sweat like you're being chased. Your mind begins inventing a story. What if this is the start of something bigger? That's not analysis. That's a survival instinct misfiring in a world of numbers. I'm going to give you a scene you won't forget. A man, let's call him Daniel, sits in his car outside a grocery store. He's not poor. His retirement account is roughly $400. But he feels poor because he watches it in real time. He sees a red number, and his brain translates it into danger. He doesn't buy the better fruit. He doesn't breathe fully. He doesn't laugh easily. He has money, but the money doesn't feel like safety. It feels like a fragile animal that could die if he looks away. Across town, another account exists like a sealed tomb. Same year, same market, same index exposure. The owner forgot their password years ago. Maybe set it up in 2008. Maybe never changed the default settings. No rebalancing. No smart adjustments. No headlines. No midnight checks. Just silence. And when we compare outcomes over a decade, the silent account beats Daniel by $73. That's not a metaphor. That's the whole mystery. How does doing nothing outperform constant responsibility? This is where the investigation becomes uncomfortable. Because the villain is not ignorance. The villain is a very specific kind of intelligence, the kind that believes more information always reduces risk. That belief sounds reasonable. It works in medicine, engineering, parenting, fitness, but in markets, the relationship flips. The harder you try to control randomness, the more you disturb the only force that reliably grows wealth, time. Before we go further, you need to understand how this crime is committed. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in 1,000 tiny ones. A notification, a red candle, an article titled, "Is it time to sell?" A pundit with a serious face saying, "Uncertainty." Each time, your brain receives a message. Act now or suffer later. And every time you act, you pay a toll, fees, spreads, taxes, and the most expensive cost of all, poor timing. Now I'm going to take you back to 1998, because every good case has an origin story that looks unrelated at first. Long-term capital management, 2 Nobel Prize winners, a former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, PhDs, models, supercomputers, and returns so smooth they looked like destiny. Wall Street didn't just admire them, it worshipped them. They were the proof that brilliance could conquer chaos. And then, in 4 months, they lost $4.6 billion and nearly detonated the global system. Picture their office like a cathedral of certainty. Whiteboards full of equations, screens pulsing with bond spreads measured in tiny differences so small you'd laugh if you didn't know how much money was stacked on them. Their strategy was simple in concept and lethal in execution. Find tiny mispricings. Bet huge amounts. And let math harvest, almost guaranteed, gains. And to make the tiny gains matter, they borrowed, and borrowed, and borrowed, sometimes a shocking amount for every dollar they actually owned. For years, it worked. That's the dangerous part. Success doesn't just reward you with money, it rewards you with a story about yourself. LTCM's story was, "We are the exception. We have the models. We have the edge. We have eliminated risk." Every month that story hardened. Every small profit became a brick in a monument to their confidence. And then the market did what markets do when humans become arrogant. It changed its behavior in a way the models called statistically impossible. August 1998, Russia defaulted on its debt. Panic spread like smoke under a locked door. Correlations that were never supposed to happen, happened everywhere at once. Trades that were safe became traps. Leverage turned from a tool into a guillotine. And the smartest people in the room discovered the oldest lesson in finance. When you borrow too much, you don't just risk losing money, you risk losing time, choices, reputation, and the ability to survive the next day. When LTCM began to wobble, it didn't look like a collapse at first. It looked like a temporary glitch, a rounding error, a moment the models would correct if everyone stayed calm. That's how the mind protects itself. It labels danger as temporary. Inside the firm, the conversations got sharper, faster, quieter. They weren't asking, "Are we wrong?" They were asking, "When will the market admit we're right?" That single question is how geniuses walk into disasters with straight backs. The phones started ringing, not with sympathy, but with math. Banks wanted collateral, counterparties wanted reassurance, reporters wanted a story. Each day the firm sold a little more dignity to buy a little more time. They trimmed positions, then trimmed again, but the market wasn't offering them an exit, it was offering them a lesson. The tighter they tried to squeeze through the door, the more the doorframe tore their skin. And here's the part most people miss: the bailout wasn't mercy. It was containment. A group of major banks, nudged by the Federal Reserve, organized a rescue because LTCM's positions were so massive that a chaotic liquidation could have sprayed panic across the entire system. In other words, the world wasn't saving LTCM, the world was saving itself from LTCM's forced selling. The geniuses became a hazard that had to be managed. Now, cut back to the schoolteacher in Ohio, the one nobody interviews. Because she has no dramatic quotes and no complex models. She bought an index fund, went back to grading papers, forgot the password, and lived her life, during the same period when Nobel Prize winners were being pulled off the ledge by Wall Street's strongest hands. She kept compounding quietly like a clock that never needs applause. She didn't beat them with skill. She beat them by avoiding their trap. She didn't mistake activity for control. This is where our investigation turns personal. Because LTCM is not just a hedge fund story. It's an extreme version of what happens to you every time you believe your attention makes you safe. Your broker app gives you the illusion of power, real-time updates, red and green flashes, charts that feel like cockpit instruments. It makes you feel like a pilot. But most investors are not flying a plane. They're sitting in the passenger seat, yanking the steering wheel because the road curves. Let me introduce a second character to our case file, Mia. She's diligent, educated, and terrified of being irresponsible. She reads market news every morning the way some people read weather forecasts. Except this weather is engineered to keep her nervous. She rebalances monthly. She rotates sectors. She feels productive. When she tells friends she's on top of her finances, they nod with respect. They don't see the hidden cost. Every adjustment is a tiny bet that she knows more than the crowd. And the financial industry loves Mia. Not because they want her to fail. They love her because her success is irrelevant to their business model. Her activity is the product. Every click, every trade, every consultation, every reallocation is a small stream of revenue flowing from her anxiety into someone else's balance sheet. When markets go up, she trades because she's excited and wants to optimize. When markets go down, she trades because she's afraid and wants to protect. Either way, the machine gets fed. Here's the psychological mechanism that makes this so vicious. Your brain treats a 5% portfolio drop like a predator in the grass. Your amygdala doesn't care that you're investing for 20 years. It cares that the number on the screen changed today. It demands action, and the market, unlike a lion, punishes action in the short term because short-term movement is mostly noise. You're running from wind, burning energy, and calling it survival. I once watched a friend check his portfolio at dinner the way someone checks a child's fever, every few minutes. With the same hope, please be better. When it was down, he lost his appetite. When it was up, he smiled for 5 seconds. Then checked again. That's not investing. That's emotional hostage taking. And if you think you're immune because you're rational, that's exactly the line the trap uses. It tells smart people their control is earned. Now we reach the most unsettling evidence in the entire file. The best investors are dead phenomenon. Fidelity and other firms have repeatedly found that accounts with the highest returns often belong to people who either passed away or simply forgot they had an account, because nobody interfered. No panic selling, no chasing, no smart timing, just relentless, boring compounding. In a world where everyone is screaming, the quiet portfolios win because silence prevents mistakes. The mistake everyone makes is assuming the market rewards effort the way life rewards effort. In your career, you work harder, you get promoted. In the gym, you train harder, you get stronger. In relationships, you show up more, you build trust. So your brain drags that logic into investing and says, if I pay attention, I'll do better. But investing is the one arena where effort often shows up as interference. And interference is usually expensive. Think of a garden, because this metaphor is painfully accurate. You plant seeds, and then you start digging them up every day to check if they're growing. You measure the roots, compare the soil, move the pot because today's sunlight feels different. You're not lazy, you're obsessed, and the obsession kills the plant. Meanwhile, your neighbor waters once a week, forgets the garden exists half the time, and harvests baskets of tomatoes. The neighbor didn't win by being smarter. The neighbor won by not disturbing the process. Here's the part that feels like betrayal. The financial advice ecosystem quietly trains you to be the gardener who can't stop digging. Media headlines create urgency. Brokerage apps gamify attention. Analyst upgrades. Hot picks. Is it time to sell? And because you're intelligent, your brain searches for patterns in the noise. Convinced the next article will unlock certainty. You call it research. The system calls it retention. The best extraction systems don't look like theft. They look like help. That's why the industry sells you control as virtue. It frames inaction as irresponsibility. It teaches you to feel guilty if you aren't adjusting, optimizing, responding, and because you don't want to be careless with your future, you become exactly what they need, a conscientious, anxious, active participant. Now let's run a clean thought experiment. Like detectives reconstructing a crime scene. It's 2009, right after the financial crisis. You have $100. The news is terrifying. Every channel is predicting doom. Investor A, the active one, moves to cash because it feels safe. He tells himself he'll re-enter when things stabilize. But stability is a moving target. Every time the market rises, his brain says, it's a trap. Every time it falls, his brain says, good thing I waited. Months pass. The market begins to recover. Investor A watches from the sidelines, collecting confirmation bias like stamps. By the time he feels comfortable, prices are already much higher. He buys back in late, proud he avoided risk, never noticing he also avoided the best part of the rebound. He ends up with a decent result. But his safety had a price, lost compounding at the moment it mattered most. Investor B, the so-called lazy one, had the same $100. Her portfolio dropped too, on paper, but she didn't watch it. She was busy working, raising kids, living. Years earlier, she had set up automatic contributions. While the market was down, her automatic plan kept buying shares at lower prices without her needing courage. By the time the recovery happened, she didn't need bravery or timing, she was already there, standing in the rain, collecting the future like water in a bucket. If you compare results a decade later, the gap looks like magic until you realize it's just behavior. Investor B didn't have secret information. She had fewer chances to sabotage herself. She avoided the single most expensive mistake, leaving the market and missing the rebound days that often cluster right after the worst fear. And here's the cruel mathematical detail that makes this case feel like a horror story. Missing a tiny fraction of the best market days can cut your returns dramatically over decades. Because those days carry a disproportionate share of long-term gains, the market doesn't grow in a smooth line. It lurches, it surprises, it rewards the people who stayed seated when everyone else ran for the exit. At this point, you might say, fine, I won't trade every day. I'll just check often. But checking is the fuse. The moment you look, you trigger a valuation. A valuation triggers emotion. Emotion triggers action. Action triggers cost. The industry knows this chain. So it builds tools to keep you looking. Because an investor who looks less trades less. And an investor who trades less becomes harder to monetize. This is why your phone buzzes like a slot machine when the market moves. Now we enter the deeper layer of the case, the part where your own biology testifies against you. Your brain evolved for immediate danger, not long-term probabilities. On the savannah, the one who hesitated died. So your nervous system learned a rule: movement equals survival. But markets flip that rule. In markets, movement often equals loss, because the greatest enemy is not volatility, it's your reaction to volatility. This is why the same person who can stay calm in a work crisis becomes irrational when their portfolio dips. A portfolio drawdown looks like a threat to future safety, and your body treats future safety as present danger. Heart rate rises, cortisol spikes, Your attention narrows. You start searching for certainty the way a trapped animal searches for a hole in the fence. You click, you scroll, you watch, you do something, and the market quietly charges you for that instinct. I'll show you the timeline of how smart investors self-destruct. Step 1. They begin with a sensible plan. Step 2. They add just a little optimization. Step 3. They attach identity to being informed. Step 4. They start believing that if they can explain the market, they can control it. Step 5. They meet a shock event, and their pride refuses to accept randomness. So they double down on control, the same way LTCM doubled down on leverage. There's a reason the LTCM story belongs in this video. It's the high-resolution image of the same psychological trap. They confused complexity with safety. They believed models could tame tail risk. They thought rare events were so rare they could be ignored. But markets don't care about what's rare. They care about what's possible. And if something is possible, it will eventually happen, especially when you've built a system that collapses if it happens. Now zoom out to your world in 2026. You have more data than any investor in history. You have alerts, AI summaries, social feeds, smart portfolios, and endless opinions that arrive faster than you can digest them. And that's exactly the danger. Because information doesn't just inform you, it invites you to act. It creates an itch, and the market punishes itchy hands. Here's a side story, a small one, but it explains everything. A young analyst named Kevin starts investing with confidence. He reads books, builds spreadsheets, sets rules. The first year goes well. He makes a few timely moves and feels rewarded. His brain marks those wins as evidence of skill, not luck, so he increases complexity, more rules, more signals, more risk management. His friends think he's disciplined. He is, but he's also becoming fragile, because complexity creates more points of failure. One day, a news headline breaks during lunch. Kevin's phone lights up like an alarm. The market drops. He sees a red number and feels the old predator circuit activate. He tells himself he's calm, but his finger is already moving. He sells, just to be safe. Then the market rebounds 2 days later. He buys back in higher. He tells himself it was a reasonable hedge, but the pattern has begun. Sell low, buy high, repeat, while believing the opposite. This is how the industry farms intelligence. Not by lying blatantly, but by offering you endless reasons to justify your impulses. They don't say, panic. They say, be prudent. They don't say, chase. They say, don't miss opportunities. They don't say, overtrade. They say, stay engaged. The language is clean. The outcome is dirty. Another hidden killer in the file is taxes and friction. Every trade has a visible cost and an invisible one. Even if commissions are zero, spreads exist, slippage exists, and in many systems, short-term gains are taxed harsher than long-term gains. The lazy investor isn't just calmer, they are more tax-efficient by default, letting time turn trading into compounding rather than income. So why does the story keep repeating? Because the market is a mirror. It doesn't reward the smartest story. It rewards the best behavior under uncertainty. The best investors aren't always the ones with the best ideas. They're the ones who built a life that doesn't require constant reassurance from a blinking screen. And that is why, in the coldest, most ironic twist of all, the dead investor often wins, not because death is a strategy, but because death removes the hands that ruin compounding. If you want the real secret behind lazy investing, it's not laziness, it's insulation. The best investors build a system that protects them from themselves. They create distance between emotion and action the way you put a locked cabinet between a child and a knife. Because the problem is never the market. The problem is what the market makes you feel, and what you do next. That's why the first move in this case isn't choosing the perfect asset. It's designing your environment. Imagine two investors with the same portfolio. One has the brokerage app on the home screen, with notifications turned on, and a habit of checking during breaks. The other has no app, no alerts, and a rule that portfolios are checked only on the first Saturday of every quarter. Same investments, different outcomes, not because of information, but because of exposure to temptation. There's a concept in behavioral finance that should be written in bold letters on your wall. What you measure frequently, you will try to manage, and what you try to manage frequently, you will usually damage. Short-term movement is mostly randomness, so frequent management becomes random decision-making dressed up in logic. It feels sophisticated, it performs like chaos. This is where the dead investor story becomes more than a punchline. It's a warning. The industry sells you a fantasy. The fantasy that you can turn investing into a skill-based video game where attention equals advantage. But for most long-term investors, attention is not an advantage. Attention is the spark that lights the fuse. Let me bring back Daniel in the parking lot. Because his story shows the daily cost. Daniel doesn't just lose money. He loses peace. The portfolio becomes a mood regulator. A green day feels like a good day, even if nothing in his life changed. A red day feels like danger, even if he's still employed, still healthy, still fine. His emotional weather is now controlled by a market he cannot control. That's not wealth, that's a leash. Now here's the twist that always shocks people. The industry profits from Daniel's leash. Not in a villain with a mustache way, but in a structural way. If Daniel is calm, he trades less. If he trades less, he generates less revenue. So the system doesn't optimize for Daniel's calm. It optimizes for Daniel's engagement. And engagement is driven by emotion, fear and greed, wrapped in helpful content. The reason headlines feel urgent is because urgency sells. 3 stocks to buy now. Is it time to sell tech? This could be the next crash. Even if you don't act, you feel compelled to check. And checking is already a form of action. The moment you look, you begin to negotiate with your future self. Maybe I should tweak something. And that negotiation is where compounding goes to die. So let's lay down the field guide that investigators use to spot the trap in real time. If you hear yourself saying any of these sentences, you are inside the system. I'll just wait for clarity. I'll get back in when it feels safer. I need to do something. I can't miss this opportunity. I'm being responsible. Those aren't always wrong, but they are often the exact phrases your brain uses to justify emotional decisions. Now we connect it back to LTCM one more time. LTCM didn't collapse because they were stupid. They collapsed because their intelligence created overconfidence. Overconfidence created leverage, and leverage removed their ability to wait. That's the true enemy. Anything that removes your ability to wait. Because waiting is the superpower of investing. Waiting is compounding's oxygen. This is why simple portfolios and automatic contributions keep showing up like the boring hero in every story. Not because simplicity is magical, but because simplicity reduces decision points. Fewer decision points means fewer emotional mistakes. Fewer emotional mistakes means more time in the market. More time in the market means compounding gets to do what it does best. Turn patience into money while you're busy living. And here's my prediction, written like a case conclusion for 2026. The winners won't be the people who watch the most market content. The winners will be the people who created the strongest barriers between their feelings and their portfolio. The ones who treat investing like plumbing, set it up correctly, maintain it occasionally, and stop staring at the pipes hoping they'll impress you. Because the market's most profitable trick isn't volatility, it's persuasion. It persuades you that attention equals intelligence. That action equals safety. That complexity equals control. And if you believe that, you will trade yourself into mediocrity while thinking you are being excellent. The dead investor doesn't believe anything. The dead investor simply stays invested. And that, in the cruelest irony of modern finance, is often enough to win. At this stage of the investigation, we need to talk about the strangest kind of poverty. The kind that happens while your net worth is rising. It's when your account grows, but your nervous system never gets the message. You keep checking, you keep adjusting, you keep feeling behind. The portfolio becomes a treadmill. More numbers, same anxiety, and the industry doesn't rush to cure that anxiety. Because anxiety is what keeps the treadmill powered. That's why doing nothing feels irresponsible to smart people. Smart people are trained to solve problems. They're rewarded for effort. They can't stand unresolved uncertainty. So when the market moves, they interpret movement as a problem demanding immediate correction. But markets move the way oceans move, constantly, naturally, without asking your permission. Trying to calm the ocean with a bucket is not diligence. It's delusion. There's a concept from ancient philosophy that fits investing better than modern finance does. Effortless action. Not laziness, but alignment. Water doesn't punch through mountains. It flows around them. It persists. It wins by refusing to waste energy on what can't be controlled. That's what a great long-term investor becomes. Not a warrior, but water. The active investor is swinging at waves. The passive investor is letting the tide do the work. Now let me add a side plot, because every good story needs a human contrast. Two siblings inherit money from their father. The older brother is brilliant, driven, and terrified of wasting the inheritance. He hires advisors, watches markets, reads reports, tweaks allocations. The younger sister chooses 3 simple funds, sets automatic contributions, and stops thinking about it. 10 years later, the older brother has a thicker folder and a thinner result. The younger sister has fewer words and more wealth. The older brother feels wronged by reality. The younger sister barely notices she won. And here's the detail nobody wants to admit. The older brother might be smarter. He might truly understand more. But understanding more is not always an advantage when the key skill is emotional restraint. Intelligence becomes a liability when it helps you rationalize impulses. The market doesn't care how elegant your reasoning is. It cares whether you stayed invested when it hurt. This is also why opportunity is often a disguised weapon. The market will present you with 1,000 chances to feel clever. A hot stock, a new sector, a narrative that makes you feel early. And every time you chase one, you are buying not just an asset, but a story about yourself. I saw it before others. That story is addictive. It creates identity, and identity makes it harder to admit mistakes, which makes losses stick longer. The investigators of behavior have a simple rule. If a system makes you feel like you must act immediately, it's usually designed to benefit from your action. Markets don't need your immediacy. Brokers do. Media does. Experts, who charge by activity, do. Your future doesn't improve because you reacted quickly to a headline. Your future improves because you built a repeatable plan and refused to abandon it under pressure. So what would the case file recommend as the anti-trap protocol? First, reduce access. Delete the app. Remove notifications. Add friction. Second, reduce decisions. Automate contributions. Set a rebalancing schedule that doesn't bend to headlines. Third, reduce identity. Stop tying your self-worth to being informed. Let investing be boring. Let your intelligence do its work where it matters, in your career, your skills, your relationships, your health, places where effort actually compounds. Because here's the ultimate reveal. The market is not the place where you prove you're smart. The market is the place where you prove you're patient. And patience is not passive. Patience is an active refusal to sabotage yourself. It's a daily discipline of not checking, not reacting, not negotiating with fear. People hear, the best investors are dead. They laugh, but the laugh is nervous. Because it exposes something humiliating, that we are often our own worst financial advisor. The dead investor doesn't have better picks. The dead investor has no impulses. And if your edge is simply fewer mistakes, you start to see why silence can outperform brilliance. In 2026, the loudest voices will keep promising control. There will be new tools, smarter dashboards, sharper predictions, faster alerts. The temptation will be to believe that the next layer of information will finally make you safe. But the truth is sharper. Safety doesn't come from seeing more. Safety comes from needing to see less. That's the final clue. The day you stop treating your portfolio like a live emergency room monitor is the day it starts acting like what it actually is. A long-term machine. Not a slot machine, not a battlefield, a machine that turns time into wealth, if you stop punching the buttons. So if you want to invest like the dead investors, without, being dead, you only need one skill. The ability to do nothing at the exact moment your instincts scream for action. That is the rarest discipline in finance. It's harder than picking stocks. It's harder than building models. It's harder than reading news. Because it requires you to override ancient survival wiring. It will always offer you a deal. Trade your peace for the illusion of control. Most people accept the deal without reading the fine print. The fine print says the cost is decades of compounding. The fine print says you'll feel busy and still underperform. The fine print says your intelligence will become someone else's revenue stream. You can refuse the deal. You can build your portfolio like a vault, not a toy. You can schedule your attention, not surrender it. You can make your plan so boring that fear can't find a handle to grab. And then, quietly, without drama, you can do what the best investors do. Stay invested. That's the verdict of the case. Your returns aren't primarily a function of what you buy. They're a function of how often you interfere. The smartest move is often not a clever trade. It's a locked door between you and your impulses. If this story felt personal, That's because it is. Millions of investors are living Daniel's parking lot scene, thinking the problem is the market. But the market is just the mirror. The real problem is the reflex. Break the reflex, and the mirror stops controlling your mood and your money. And when you finally look up from the screen and back at your life, something strange happens. The market gets quieter. Not because volatility disappears, but because you're no longer feeding it your attention like oxygen. That's when investing becomes what it was always supposed to be. A background process that funds your future while you focus on the present. And that is how you become the kind of investor who wins, not by being the smartest in the room, but by being the hardest to manipulate.